So, welcome back to the sixth week of this course on managing change in organizations. And in this week, to start with, we had been discussing about how we are going to communicate at various phases of change, because communication is very important in the sense that we need to communicate when we are going to initiate the change, we are going to communicate when we are going to bring about the change or implement the change. So, at each of the stages of the change management, we need to communicate with a different set of stakeholders to ensure its successful implementation. Now, in the first part of this lecture, we had talked about how we are going to communicate with the change. In continuation of that, now we are going to discuss about the strategies for communicating change, and when we are going to talk about the strategies for communicating the change, the idea here is that what kind of strategies we need to adopt to ensure that when we are going to communicate or whatever we are going to communicate in terms of content, it has intended effect in the sense that it is going to influence the stakeholders, so that we are able to implement change successfully. So, in continuation of this discussion on strategies for communicating change, first we have to see that when we are going to communicate and what we are going to communicate. Right now, if you look at this, it talks about the communication needs, which is going to vary at different stages of the change. Right. If you look at this curve, which says that this is called change curve, and this change curve you see that it takes this kind of shape at different time periods, right, or you can say the different stages of the change. Now, if you look at the reaction to the change process, you know that to start with, you know that you feel happy and satisfied the way you have been working in terms of technology, culture, structure, all kind of things. So, you feel satisfied with that one, but what actually happens when the change is initiated, the first stage, then you are in the denial mode. Okay. So, you say no, this is not required, this is not related to me, and you make all kind of excuses related to this one. Then if once you come to know that it is going to affect you some way, directly or indirectly, then the resistance comes in, right. Then you move further, the exploration stage, then you try to see that how it is going to affect you, and finally, you find certain hopes. Oh, you see that okay, this is good, this could be good, this is going to affect you in a more positive way. You think that okay, this is going to influence your work, and if that happens, then you move to the next mode, that is commitment. So, we have already talked about this denial, resistance, exploration and commitment. So, we have to see that in what way we are going to communicate at each of these stages, that matters. At the first stage, you need to communicate why we want to go for it. Denial stage, which is very important, because they are not able to listen. So, you need to establish rapport, you need to create some kind of link with your stakeholders, including employees, so that they are ready to listen to you. At this stage, you need to manage resistance. So, you need the change managers need to communicate to the employees and other stakeholders to reduce the level of resistance, right. At this level, you need to tell them the benefits about it. At this level, again you see that how it is going to be useful for them in their work, and at this level, you need to ensure that they are committed to the change, right. You communicate, okay, see this is how it is going to work for you. So, if you look at this curve, change curve, and at different stages of the change, what you find that the communication needs keep on changing, and accordingly you need to decide about your strategies, right. So, at this stage, basically what actually happens, you need to talk and to be heard. Resistance stage, you need to tell them the big picture, tell them the benefits. You also need to be involved, and you also need to that yes, they are in the control. It means that employees resistance can be removed if you are going to communicate in terms of the content these things. Then next stage we are there somehow start accepting that you try to give more and more information, more assurances, more affirmation from the change managers. And at the exploration stage, you need to actively involve them, so that they have become a part of the process of the change and they are able to work with others. And finally, you need to acknowledge their efforts, the commitment for the work, and you also accordingly reward and recognize people who have been actively participated and work for the change to be successful. So, you can see that the communication needs at different stages are going to change. Now, when we are talking about this, there are other factors which also matters. For example, the language. Language is very important. And when you are going to develop your strategies related to language, you need to use such a language which reflects and reinforces the relationship with the stakeholders. Then power is another important factor, because the power relationship keep on changing depending upon the structure, the status quo that you are going to maintain, the kind of relationship that you have. Then gender also is important factor, because you have to see that when you are going to communicate with different set of people, let us say male and female, your strategy should be different with males as well as females. And so, what we are going to talk about here is how these things are going to impact the communication, any communication which is related to the change. So, as I told you that language is very important, what kind of language you are using in terms of the content and the structure of the content in terms of words and other things that you are using. It reflects and reinforces the social and power relationship. For example, if the content is coming from the top management, that shows yes, we are going for it. So, it also reflects basically not only the social relationship, but the power relationship. Who is communicating with whom? That is very, very important. If the communication is coming from the top management, or communication is going from the people who are working at the down level. Then gender differences, right. Gender differences means when you are going to communicate, who gets the credit, getting the credit. Most of the cases you will find that it is the male who start taking the credit compared to the female, right. When it comes to confidence and boasting, it is found more in female. Coming to asking questions, basically it is the male the female who asks more questions, they are probing questions. So, accordingly you need to develop your strategies when you are going to deal or communicate with male and female employees. Similarly, you also need to understand the kind of language that you are going to use while communicating, right. Other differences include how you are going to giving feedback, that is also important, right, because giving feedback to the people, the kind of language that you use, with whom you are communicating, all these things are very, very important, right. And then whether you are going to communicate directly or indirectly, right, because direct communication has more influence, is more powerful compared to indirect communication, right. So, what we have discussed is that when you are going to develop strategies, you need to keep in mind the needs of the communication, at what stage you are going to do, and then what kind of language you are using and with whom you are communicating, and what kind of communication is, whether it is direct or indirect. Another important factor which is linked with communication is known as emotion. Emotion is basically the kind of feeling that people have, right. It is also related to moods of the people. Okay. So, moods and feelings are two important factors related to emotion. So, it also communicates it also contributes to the communication process, because if you are going to communicate with a tone of emotion, then probably it would have a better influence, right, compared to if it is emotionless. So, when you are going to communicate related to change, then you have to see that whether it is going to how it is going to affect people. Okay. So, whether their emotional state and identity is going to be influenced by this or not. If it is not influenced, then you find that this is going to work for it, it means that they would be in a positive mood, and if they find that this kind of change is going to affect their emotional state, then it is not good, and then they would take it in a different way, right. So, when you are going to communicate regarding change to the employees, you need to avoid certain things, or you can say that you need to adopt certain strategies which is going to be more effective while communicating. So, here three different methods have been used, like perspective taking. It means you need to talk from both the perspectives, your own perspective, from the management perspective, that how this change is going to be good for the organization. Similarly, you also need to talk about the change from the employee's perspective, because the moment you change the perspective, things become different, or how you are going to perceive things become different. So, you look at it from their perspective. Similarly, you also use such a language which does not include any kind of threat, right. Because if you are using certain actions or say language which somehow includes threat, then it is not good. Then you are basically forcing employees to have certain kind of feelings and emotions which could be termed as negative, not positive, right. And then you reflect upon. Reflection in the sense that okay, you communicate and then you ensure that the person has understood it well. If it is not possible, then you need to reflect upon and then re-communicate in a different way, so that the person is able to understand what has been said. So, emotion is very important for that matter. Now, coming to the adopting different strategies, let us see that how we are going to communicate. See, it all depends upon number of factors that we have been talking about, the need for change, right, with whom you are going to communicate, at what time you are going to communicate, with which stakeholder you are going to communicate, right, and then how much you communicate, right. So, if you communicate too much, then what will happen? Then it may not be good, right. People might feel irritated, right. So, you communicate as per the requirement, and you also ensure that the communication is very relevant depending upon the requirement of the people, and that depends upon first the kind of change that you want to bring, and then what is the timing of the change, depending upon at what stage of change you are there, right. So, accordingly you need to ensure that there is a lot of variation about the extent of communication and how much you are going to communicate, right. For example, if you are going for say radical changes or transformational changes, then that need to be communicated over and over, more and more, so that people are able to understand it. But if you are going for short incremental changes, if you are not communicating too much, even then it is good. Similarly, at what point of time you are going to communicate change, say at what stage of change. So, in the beginning you need to communicate more, and as you go along with, then the content, the language keep on changing, and then accordingly you need to change your strategy, that how you are going to communicate with them. Then another point is getting word out of buy in or buy in. What does it mean? So, whether you are going to communicate just to pass on certain information related to the change, or you want to communicate to ensure their participation in the process, right. So, if it is a intended change, in most cases we will go for planned changes. What happens? Top managers communicate the intention to go for certain changes, and it is communicated down the line. So, it is the kind of information that we are providing to the people down the line, that okay, we want to go for this kind of change, right. But this does not ensure participation as well as acceptance of change. Okay. So, the best way is that you are going to communicate to ensure better participation from the employees in the process of the change, right. So, you need to communicate in such a way, so that you are not only going to provide information related to the change, but also ensure that they are able to participate, right. And then these are the different methods that could be used to communicate: spray and pray. You just spray the rumor and then see that what happens, or you tell and sell, you tell people what you are going to do, and then you market it, okay, we have to go for it, right. First you underscore and see what happens, and then explore, see how people are going to react. Then identify and reply, identify such people who are the stakeholders, or those key stakeholders who are likely to resist more, and then you tell them what is in store for them when they are going for a change, right. Or sometimes you withhold certain information with some people, not necessarily that you are going to provide all kind of information to the people, or sometimes you uphold it. It means okay, you provide this information. So, both you need to identify with whom and what kind of information you are going to provide or what kind of information you are going to uphold. Related to this, if you say this, the communication strategies, it depends upon two dimensions, that is how much information you want to transfer, more information to less information, and similarly whether you want it to be more effective or less effective, right. So, you can see the 5 methods that we talked about here, it talks about spray and pray. Okay. Here you want to provide more information, but it is not going to be effective. Similarly, if you look at tell and sell, here also you will find that it is more effective compared to other methods, but underscore and explore is optimized in the sense that in this level you will find that communication is more effective, while the amount of information that is being transmitted or transformed is average. Right. Similarly, if you go here, you will find the identify and reply. It means that you are able to identify key stakeholders or key people with whom you are going to communicate, and it would have more intended results. Here either you are going to provide enough information or not at all. It means here basically you are trying to uphold information like this one, but it is not going to be effective at all. So, these two, while information is amount of information that is being transferred is more or less, these are not very good strategies. Okay. These are average, and this is the best strategy, underscore and explore. It means that first you see that what is the situation, what is the need for the change, and then accordingly you decide with whom you are going to communicate, and then explore what is to be communicated, right, in terms of how much information you want to provide, and see that what would be its impact, right. Moving further, you also need to see whether the communication has its intended effect or not. So, there are a lot of questions that you can ask from the various stakeholders, like who is communicating with whom, whether it is top management communicating with the people down the line, or whether it is change managers, or the line managers or supervisors who are communicating with their subordinated staff. Then what issues they are talking about. When you are going to initiate a change, are they talking about issues or problems that might come up, are they talking about whether it is going to be successful or not, how are they talking about how it is going to be implemented, are they going to talk about what would be their stake for them if it is going to there is going to be a change, right. So, lot of issues could be talked about when it comes to communication. Then what are the issues which receives more attention and arouse most anxiety, right. Those issues which are going to affect individual and their status in the organization, they receive more attention and it would cause more identity among the employees. Now, another issue related to this is that do people receive all the information that they require? Not necessary. So, when you are going to communicate something, you also need to ensure that how much information is to be provided and to whom. So, you are going to be selective while providing information, because you cannot provide all the information to everybody, because you do not know how it is going to impact or whether it is going to bounce back or not. So, you need to ensure that only relevant information is provided to those who require it. Then you also need to ensure that whether people have trust and confidence, especially those who receive the information, how they take the information. If the person who is providing information is trustworthy, then people will have more trust, or if it is coming from the top management, then they would have more trust. For example, if it is given by their immediate supervisor or top managers, then that makes a difference, because if it is coming from the top management, then they would have more trust and confidence information in the information that they receive, right. Then who is the source? Because source is very important. What is the source of information, right? If the source is more authentic, then it is good, and if the source is not authentic, then it is not good. Then how are we going to communicate? What channel? Whether you are going to use face to face, whether you are going to use email, whether you are going to use other mediums, right. So, that also makes a difference. So, based on that you can measure, you can also measure whether the communication is going to have its intended effect or not. Moving further, if you look at upward communication, you will find that it is more effective compared to downward communication, right. So, you need to ensure that the communication is happening starting with the workers employees to the lower level, to the middle level and to the higher level, right. Because if it is going in this way, probably you will find that they listen more, right, and it would have more intended effect. So, you need to ensure that the change managers are paying more attention to communicating their message to others than listening to what others have to tell them. So, that makes a difference. So, if you look at this figure, you can see that how the change managers are going to talk to a set of employees, right. Now, beyond that upward communication, another important factor that comes in is silence. You will find that if you are going to withhold information, that creates some kind of silence in the organization. It means you are going to create a situation where people are not going to speak about it, right. So, that is what we know as silence. So, organizational silence is something that is not good, and it happens if you are going to withhold information largely on account of certain things, because you do not want others to know about what is happening, right. And that helps, that is not good in the sense that in that case change managers or decision makers loses the opportunity to consider alternative perspective, because once they have decided to go for it, they go for it without telling others, okay, creating some kind of silence, right. It also inhibits learning, because it affects the ability of the managers to detect and correct the causes of performance. So, if you are creating this kind of silence by withholding information from the employees down the line, then that is something that is not good. So, what needs to be done basically when it comes to silence? Why it happens? It depends upon the top management and the environment, both the organization and the environment. So, the top management and the organizational environment is such that management develops certain beliefs about the employees, and these beliefs are related to something that is not positive, that is negative in nature. For example, they think that employees are interested in themselves only, management is more knowledgeable compared to the employees, right. Unity is good and dissent is bad. It means that if we tell them there is a dissent which is not good for the organization. So, these factors are percolating from where? It depends upon how the top management is going to perceive and look at the employees, right. So, all this is going to again lead to the structure and policies which is decided by the organization. In terms of that, you can say that they would try to develop a structure where there is a possibility of holding information, like they go for more centralized decision making. Okay. They do not have any kind of upward feedback mechanism, so that they do not get any information from the employees down the line, right. And then management also adopts certain practices which cannot be considered as good, like rejecting feedback, or if there is a dissent or negative feedback, not accepting them. Okay. Or there is no informal solicitation of negative feedback, you do not ask for any kind of information from the employees, right. So, all these the policies and the management practices basically create a climate of silence. It means that you are depriving others to provide any kind of feedback to you, you do whatever you want, you withhold information, okay. And this is going to be influenced by sense making, collective sense making, by interaction and communication, and the degree of demographic dissimilarity between employees and the top managers. Okay. If there is more, then the climate of silence that is created is very high, right. And then ultimately it leads to what you call organizational silence, which could not be termed as something that is good for the organization. So, we need to ensure that we should not withhold a large set of information, we should provide relevant information to the relevant stakeholders, which is good. So, the kind of strategy that an organization adopts, they need to ensure that they are not going to do anything like that one, right. Another important factor is interpersonal effects, that is also important. I mean, the relationship that you have, like trust and willingness to listen, or the quality of information, these are two important things, which is going to basically impact the quality of communication, right. So, if people have trust and you are ready to listen to each other, it means the interpersonal effects are high. And if that is so, and if the kind of information that you are providing that is being exchanged is good, then the quality of communication would be much better, right. So, interpersonal effect of the relationship also matters, because this leads to more trust and willingness to listen. And if you add it further, it means if you provide quality of information, then the quality of communication would be much better. So, if you can see here that how the interaction happens between the change managers and the organizations in different situations. Look at it. Here you can see situation like including behavior of the change managers, how change managers behave, how others interpret the situation, right. What could be the possible responses to the change managers, how other members of the organizations respond to them, right. How change managers interpret to others' responses. And then there is a question whether information is being withheld or not, right. And then change managers response, how what they are going to do next, what would happen, right. So, you can see that when the interaction happens, it all depends upon two things, the relationship and the trust and the quality of information that is being exchanged, right. For example, if you look at this side, you can see if your attitude is to help the others, you really want to identify the agenda, real agenda, right. You are telling them whatever is required, then what will happen? The interpretation and the response of both the sides, the change managers, the employees would be good, because the kind of exchange that is happening is of quality in nature, right. And that is why it is written, see here, if you look at the last point, says we will only tell them what we want to them. It means that you are going to create a situation which is not good, right. But if you are going to withhold information, you are going to provide selective information, then it is not good, because the response to this would be different, right. So, you need to ensure what we talked about earlier, that trust and willingness to listen is very important, and the second factor is the quality of information that is being exchanged. So, both of them are equally important. So, we can also adopt certain contingency approach depending upon the requirement. We can change our communication strategies depending upon what kind of change that you want to have, whether you want to go for development or incremental changes, whether it is task focused, whether it is charismatic change, you want to bring about something that is entirely different, or you are going for some kind of turnaround, total transformation, or these are the different stages of the change. So, it depends upon what kind of change you want to have and at what stage of change you want to communicate, right. So, your communication strategy depends upon these two important factors, planning, enabling, launching, catalyzing. So, these are the different stages. Planning stage, you think about the kind of change, then here you try to execute them and then actually implemented them, and finally, you want to ensure that it is successfully implemented and it is sustainable, right. So, at all these stages of change, you need to ensure that what kind of communication strategy would be adopted, and then depending upon the kind of change that you want to bring about. So, your communication strategy depends upon that. Then you also need to look at the media, what kind of media you are going to use, right, whether you are going to personally communicate or whether you have a hierarchy of media which you are going to use for different purposes. For example, you are using email or a memo, right. So, you can use different kind of media, say you can use internet, you can use email, you can use say blogs, bulletins, dashboards, right, or you can go for personal communication depending upon the kind of audience that you have. And then you also need to look at the richness of the media, as we have already talked about. Face to face is the best method to communicate, because this is the most rich media when it comes to communication, right. Then who is responsible? So, the CEO and the change managers, both of them are equally responsible, because CEO should be the principal communicator of change. For example, if you remember when there was some kind of turmoil going on in Infosys, then Narayan Murthy wrote a letter to all the employees explaining the situation and what are the things that need to be done to the employees. So, basically CEO is actually responsible, and when he is communicating something with the employees, that makes much more sense, but if it is done at the lower level, then you have to see whether people trust them or not, and if it is not trustworthy, then it is not going to have intended effect. Similarly, the tag teams, that is the change managers, who are basically responsible, because these they are going for change management, right. They are also known as transition management team, because they are responsible to bring about the desired change. So, they are also supposed to converse through units and information to the people, and they should also be equally responsible while communicating about the change. But the best thing is that if it is coming from the CEOs, because he is the principal communicator, he should tell what is going to happen and how it is going to affect us and what needs to be done by the us, right. Then another important issue is that when you are going to communicate, you also need to monitor the progress, whether this communication is having its intended effect or not, right. For example, when you are going to provide some kind of briefing, whether people are attending to it or not, whether people are reacting to it or not, what kind of rumors are coming out, right, whether who are the people listening to, right, because you need to identify those stakeholders who have very strong presence and they can influence the behavior of the employees, right, and whether this it is bringing about a change in the behavior or not, because otherwise you will not move from denial to exploration and finally to the commitment stage, and whether people read other kind of support in addition to communicating information to them or not. So, ultimately what we have discussed here, when it comes to strategies for successful communication, you need to clarify roles and responsibilities, who is going to do what, who is going to what is to be communicated, what not is to be communicated, right. So, that the basic idea is that you are able to reduce uncertainty and still a sense of control among the employees. That is the basic objective of communication, and you need to be consistent in your communication. It does not mean that you are communicating something today and tomorrow you are going to communicate something different. So, make sure that you are going to be consistent. Your communication means that the key messages are going to be consistent. Assurances and facts should be separated. Okay. You say that okay, the fact is this, but this is the assurance which are giving, and I cannot guarantee whether it is going to happen or not. So, right, then provide as much information support as you think is required for the change process. Do not go for silence, or do not withhold or uphold information, or do not provide all the information to all the stakeholders, that is also not good. And also ensure that the structure, tone and content of communication acknowledge people's emotional and intellectual needs. That is where we talked about language, gender and emotional, its role in communication, right. Listening, that is important activity. Provide a range of feedback channels, so that you get feedback from the employees, that is very important. You can also use FAQs, FAQ frequently asked questions. So, you create a set of FAQs, you communicate it and then update it, and then make sure that it is available with all the people related to any change effort, because this is how we are going to clear the doubt of people, right, and then get people's participation, that is very important. Through this communication, you can ensure that people are able to listen, able to accept, and then ultimately participate in the process of change. With this, we are going to close it. Thank you very much.